October 17th, 1972, in a quiet, unassuming town called St. Joseph, Missouri, a baby boy is born. His name? Marshall Bruce Mathers III. No one in that delivery room, not even his own mother, Debbie, could have imagined that this tiny infant would one day become a global icon, a lyrical titan, a figure who would both define and defy a generation. This isn't just the story of a rapper. This is the story of a survivor, a poet, and a fighter. This is the story of how Marshall Mathers became Eminem. The stage for Marshall's life was set long before he was born. His parents, Debbie Nelson and Marshall Bruce Mathers Jr., were in a band together, touring motels along the Dakotas-Montana border. They were young, full of dreams, and probably a little bit reckless. Debbie was just 15 when she met Bruce, who was 20. They married quickly, and by the time Debbie was 18, she was giving birth to their son after a grueling 73-hour labor. It was a difficult start, and one that nearly cost both mother and child their lives. This traumatic entry into the world seemed to foreshadow the turbulent journey that lay ahead for young Marshall. The family unit, if you could even call it that, was fractured from the very beginning. Bruce Mathers Jr. left when his son was just a baby, moving to California and starting a new family. He would become a phantom figure in Marshall's life, a ghost whose absence would echo through his most powerful and painful lyrics. Debbie, now a single teenage mother with no support system, found herself adrift. She and little Marshall began a nomadic existence, bouncing between relatives in Missouri and Michigan, never staying in one place for too long. Imagine being a small child, constantly uprooted. New houses, new schools, new faces. The concept of home was a fleeting one. Stability was a luxury they simply couldn't afford. This constant upheaval made it incredibly difficult for Marshall to form lasting friendships. Just as he started to feel comfortable, to make a connection, it was time to pack up and move again. This early isolation planted the seeds of the outsider persona that would later define his music. He was always the new kid, the one who didn't quite fit in. Life with Debbie was chaotic. She struggled with her own demons, and the environment Marshall grew up in was often unstable. He found solace in things that offered escape. Comic books were a huge passion. He'd spend hours lost in the vibrant black and white worlds of superheroes and villains, drawing his own characters, creating narratives where he could be the hero. This wasn't just a childhood hobby. It was his first foray into storytelling, into building worlds with words and pictures. It was a way to control a narrative in a life where he had very little control. Another early love was for words themselves. Marshall was a bright kid, but he wasn't a traditional student. He was more interested in the dictionary than his textbooks. He would pore over its pages, fascinated by the rhythm, the rhyme, the sheer power of language. He'd discover a new word and then spend hours finding other words that rhymed with it, building intricate chains of sound and meaning. This was the foundation of his lyrical genius being laid, brick by painstaking brick, in the quiet corners of whichever temporary home he found himself in. The move that would change everything came when Marshall and Debbie settled on the east side of Detroit, Michigan. Specifically, they moved to a neighborhood just a stone's throw from 8 Mile Road, the infamous dividing line between the city's predominantly black urban core and its white suburban sprawl. Here, the feeling of being an outsider was amplified tenfold. Marshall was one of only a handful of white kids in his neighborhood and school. The feeling of not belonging was no longer just internal. It was a visible, daily reality. The streets of Detroit were a harsh classroom. Bullying was relentless and often brutal. He was a target because he was different, the poor, quiet, white kid. He endured beatings that were so severe they left him with lasting physical and emotional scars. One incident was so bad it put him in a coma for several days. These experiences were terrifying, but they also forged a certain kind of armor. They instilled in him a resilience, a defiant spirit that refused to be broken. If the world was going to be hostile, he was going to learn how to fight back. But it wasn't with his fists that he would ultimately make his stand. It was with his voice. The key that unlocked everything was a gift from his Uncle Ronnie, Debbie's younger brother. Ronnie was more like a big brother and a best friend to Marshall. They were incredibly close. One day, Ronnie gave his nephew a cassette tape. It was the soundtrack to the movie Breakin', featuring the song Reckless by Steve. Marshall was mesmerized. He had never heard anything like it. The beat, the flow, the raw energy of hip-hop, it spoke to him in a way nothing else ever had. That single cassette tape was a revelation. It was the moment a light bulb didn't just turn on, it exploded. This was it. This was the escape he had been searching for. This was the language he was born to speak. Hip-hop was a world built on lyrical dexterity, on storytelling, on turning pain and struggle into art. It was a culture where the power of your words could earn you respect, regardless of where you came from or what you looked like. For the shy, bullied kid from the wrong side of 8 Mile, it was a lifeline. He began to obsessively study the craft. He'd listen to rap tapes over and over, rewinding them on his cheap boombox, trying to decipher every rhyme, every metaphor, every intricate cadence. He mimicked the great LL Cool J, the Beastie Boys, Run DMC. He wasn't just listening, he was dissecting. He was learning the mechanics of a multisyllable rhyme scheme before he even knew what to call it. He filled notebooks with his own rhymes, practicing relentlessly, honing his skills in the privacy of his bedroom. This was his secret weapon. While others saw a scrawny, quiet, white kid, a storm of lyrical complexity was brewing inside him. He started tentatively participating in freestyle battles in his high school cafeteria. Imagine the scene. A circle of students, mostly black, taking turns, spitting rhymes. And then this unknown white kid steps in. The initial reaction was always skepticism, often outright ridicule. They called him Elvis, mocking his race in a genre dominated by black artists. But then he'd open his mouth, and everything would change. The laughter would die down, replaced by stunned silence, then by begrudging respect, and finally by cheers. The words just poured out of him, complex, witty, and viciously sharp. He could dismantle an opponent with a single verse. He used his life, his pain, his status as an underdog, as fuel for his fire. The very things that made him a target for bullies became his greatest strengths in a rap battle. He could outrhyme, outthink, and outtalk anyone who dared to step to him. It was during this time that he adopted the moniker Eminem, derived from his initials, Marshall Mathers. This would later evolve into the name the world would come to know, Eminem. He and his best friend, Deshaun Holton, who would become proof of the group D12, became fixtures in Detroit's underground hip-hop scene. They weren't just friends. They were brothers in rhyme, pushing each other to be better, sharper, more creative. They spent their nights at the legendary Hip Hop Shop, an open mic venue that served as the crucible for Detroit's burgeoning rap talent. This was his true education. While he would eventually drop out of high school after failing the 9th grade 3 times, his lyrical vocabulary and his understanding of rhythm and poetry were at a collegiate level. He was a student of the game, and the battle circles of Detroit were his university. This period was crucial. It was where he paid his dues, where he earned his stripes, not through a record deal or a radio hit, but through raw, face-to-face, lyrical combat. He proved time and time again that his talent transcended race. He earned respect the hard way, one rhyme at a time. This foundation, the broken home, the constant moving, the bullying, the discovery of hip-hop, and the trial by fire of the battle scene, was the bedrock upon which the legend of Eminem would be built. Every hardship, every moment of pain and isolation was being channeled into an artistic voice that was unlike anything the world had ever heard. He was just a kid from Detroit with a notebook full of rhymes and a fire in his belly. But he was on the verge of starting an earthquake that would shake the very foundations of music and culture. The most difficult days were behind him, but the biggest fights were still yet to come. Thanks for watching this first episode of our deep dive into the life of Marshall Mathers. The story is just getting started, and the next phase is where things really begin to explode. Make sure you're resubscribed with notifications on so you and miss episode 2. Yeah, I'll see you then.